Hi, welcome to the video assignment for Unit 7, Depression in America. Today we're going to talk about the New Deal critics. Now this may come as a surprise to you, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal had its critics. There were many, but I want to talk about three today. One from the left, one from the right, and the most dangerous critic of all, the Supreme Court. Now one suggestion before we begin, if you haven't already, go back to Angel, take a look at the PowerPoint slides that are listed called Critics of the New Deal, download them, print them out, and follow along. They'll also help you in terms of note taking. All right? Wait for you. Okay, back. Perhaps the most formidable and dangerous challenge to the New Deal came from the Supreme Court. Between 1935 and 1936, a series of Supreme Court decisions threatened the New Deal, and many thought the overall recovery. This included the President of the United States. Now, by the end of 36, what the Supreme Court had done is ruled against New Deal laws in 7 of 9 cases. And what I mean by this is declaring New Deal laws unconstitutional. These included the National Industrial Recovery Act and the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the NIRA, and the AAA. Supreme Court said the NRA gave too much power to the president, and the AAA constituted illegal restraint of trade because it paid farmers not to farm. By the way, that was their problem. They were making too much. As you probably have already figured out, the NRA deals with the industry, the AAA deals with agriculture, two major segments of the economy. And these decisions are aimed right at the heart of the New Deal. By 1936, the reason this happens is that the Supreme Court is rather conservative. There have been justices appointed by the presidents of the 20s, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. The bench included former presidential candidate and Secretary of State Charles Evans Hughes, who we met in progressive America as a progressive, but now by 1936, he's a conservative. This court made several rulings against the New Deal. Charles Evans Hughes Court. And now FDR is afraid that more further rulings is going to ruin the recovery. Thus, he comes up with a plan. His plan is to increase the size of the Supreme Court. Problem is, he's arrogant about this plan, and he ends up ticking everybody off. First thing he does is he doesn't consult congressional leaders. So this plan comes out of nowhere. There's no legs in Congress to push it. His plan, I haven't told you. I need to. His plan proposed adding 6 new justices to the Supreme Court on the pretense that the current judges were too old and too feeble and needed help to handle the court's workload. For good measure, Roosevelt proposed adding up to 50 new federal judges for the lower courts as well. Now, technically, there's nothing wrong with this plan. Constitution doesn't say anything about how many justices you're supposed to have or not supposed to have. But Congress determines that. And Roosevelt announces his plan without talking to Congress. Thus, the proposal backfires. Because Roosevelt insulted 9 Supreme Court justices. He also insulted Congress. Congress voted this down. But here's an interesting wrinkle in this. Within a few months of this plan backfiring, the Supreme Court started ruling favorably for the New Deal. And one conservative justice, guy's named William Devanter, decides FDR's right. He is too old, he is too feeble, and it's time for him to retire. This allows Roosevelt to make a more liberal replacement, one who would be more in favor of the progressive ideas of the New Deal. Thus, the long-term significance of this whole court packing scheme is that Roosevelt begins to replace conservative justices with more left-leaning justices. And by 1954, after the White House has been under the Democrats for almost 20 years, the lineup is set to be of the Supreme Court to be leaning far enough left that civil rights legislation can happen. In particular, Brown versus Board of Education. But that comes later. All I need you to know right now is that the Supreme Court is the most dangerous critic of the New Deal, the one that could derail the whole program. Now, our critic from the left is Huey Long. Now, Huey Long is a rags to riches story from north central Louisiana. He grew up with nothing, worked his way through law school. In fact, he only attended law school 1 year, and that was just long enough to get his books. Back then, you could study, pass the bar, and you could practice without a law degree. Huey became a successful lawyer in North Louisiana, attacking corporations such as railroads, banks, and Standard Oil. Big corporations. Matter of fact, Huey in a lot of ways is a progressive when progressivism is no longer cool. We're talking late 1920s. In 1928, Huey Long is elected governor of Louisiana. 1930, he's elected senator. For 2 years, he serves in both jobs because he's scared of losing power. Huey was also a big fan of LSU, especially the band and the football team. He led the parades before football games, and he even wrote the band a song. The song's called Touchdown for LSU, still played by the Tiger Band today. For the football team, he expanded their stadium. And as such, I call Tiger Stadium the house that Long built. Because Long built this stadium in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, in a poor state. How'd he do it? Simple. He appropriated state funds that was given to him by the New Deal and the WPA to build for LSU a dormitory. And before you laugh at that and think, oh my, this is corruption, he did build a dormitory. In fact, it was under the north end zone and the south end zone of Tiger Stadium. From the 1930s all the way into the early 1990s, male students lived under the stadium. Long, as a critic of the New Deal, he at first supported FDR and helped him win the nomination in 1932, directed delegates in the FDR's camp. But once FDR rolls out this New Deal in the first 100 days, Huey goes, whoa, this New Deal is way too conservative to make a difference. It's not going to help the poor person. That's what Huey says. In fact, Huey led a 3-week filibuster against the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. And in this filibuster, which, by the way, a filibuster is seizing the floor in the U.S. Senate and not letting it go, he talked to senators about how to make cornbread, or as he called it, corn pone. And he told them all about life at LSU and how things were great. 3 weeks tried to block the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. It failed. At one point, Huey Long had this to say about the Roosevelt administration. Whenever this administration has gone to the left, I voted with it. And then when this administration has gone to the right, I voted against it. And by 1935, Long was made what he calls the Share Our Wealth program. It proposes a massive redistribution of the nation's wealth via a Robin Hood scheme of taking from the rich and giving to the poor. It guaranteed, Long said, a $5,000 estate for every American family. And then Long declared every man a king, which became Long's slogan and the title of his autobiography. This program, the Share Our Wealth, is widely popular with poor people. And by 1936, Long is planning to run against Roosevelt for the Democratic nomination. In fact, FDR is concerned enough to consider Long the biggest threat and the man most likely to unseat him in 1936. FDR had this to say about Long. Huey is the second most dangerous man in America. But Roosevelt did not have to worry, for Long was assassinated on September 10th, 1935, in the Louisiana Capitol building, a building that he built. Now, make this interesting. Long, September 10th, Long's in Baton Rouge at the Capitol trying to direct state legislation. One of the things he's done is redraw judicial districts in Louisiana to where he can have more of his supporters on the bench. One judge he knocks out offends his son-in-law, Dr. Carl Weiss. Dr. Weiss is mad enough about it to go to Baton Rouge and confront Huey. And I just want to imagine the scene here. Louisiana Capitol, on one side is the House chamber, on the other side is the Senate chamber. It's a long marble hall in the middle. Dr. Weiss is hanging out in the hallway behind a marble column. Huey comes out of the Senate chamber with his entourage, his security guards. Dr. Weiss steps out from behind a column and fires on Long at close range. Whether or not Weiss actually hit Long or not, that's debatable. Because the moment Weiss threatened the senator, bodyguards opened fire. And the best modern way I can explain this is think about the Empire State Building scene in The Matrix. Just like that. Long is assassinated. But I want you to remember, he is the critic of the New Deal from the left. Now, the critic from the right is Father Charles Conklin. Conklin is a Roman Catholic priest who has a radio program that emanates from Chicago. His weekly radio audience is close to 30 to 40 million listeners, approximately 1/4 of the total national radio audience. In short, Father Charles Conklin is a Roman Catholic evangelist. Very appealing and very entertaining to the middle class, who really fear the loss of their way of life. First they feared it in the Progressive period, now they fear it in the Depression. Like Long, Conklin admired Roosevelt at first. But by the end of the decade, the late 1930s, Father Charles Conklin was thinking the New Deal has gone too far, is too liberal, it's created too much change. And he's become increasingly radical and supportive of fascist dictators, such as Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. That's what he'd say in his radio programs. He'd praise their actions. And fact is, Conklin sort of has a point. Because if you look at the nations who got out of the Great Depression first one is Germany. And that's in spite of the fact Germany had the furthest to go. So Conklin is your critic from the right. He's your conservative critic. So I want you to keep in mind, just for the exam, that Huey Long criticized the New Deal from the left, saying that the New Deal was too conservative and it didn't go far enough. Father Charles Conklin is a conservative who attacked the New Deal from the right, saying that it was too liberal and it went too far, and that the Supreme Court was the most dangerous critic of them all. Thank you. See you in class.